Greetings, classicists, to your next online lesson. This one is on the heroic code, the motivation of characters in both the Odyssey and the Iliad. So let's get started. If there's a lot of noise, it's because the cats haven't had their day. The cats have not had their walk today, so they're very cross. So I may have to stop and do that, but I'll try and do a lesson, shush, without introduction. Without interruption. So this is a little starter for you. There's no need to get too deeply involved. What I'm trying to do here is just get you to think about your own morality, what principles guide you and indeed the modern world in life, and see how they may differ from those of Homer's heroes. Because to judge people's actions, it's important to understand the moral framework that they're operating in. So this is a classic puzzle, and again, I know we've done a few sort of philosophical questions to start with. It's not a philosophy course, and if you don't enjoy them, don't panic. It's just to get your brains warmed up as much as anything else. So this is called the trolley dilemma, and it's an interesting sort of test of modern morality, if you like. So the situation is this: you are the man with the lever, looking a little bit miserable, and there is a train hurtling down the tracks. If you pull the lever, the train will divert to the track with one person tied to it. And if you do nothing, the train will keep going and it will kill the 5 people tied to the tracks. What would you do and why? What is the moral reasoning for you to pull the lever or not pull the lever? It's a question to which there is no right answer, although in theory it does highlight your moral world view. Arguments range from pulling the lever because of the greater good. So killing one person is better than killing 5, so therefore that's what must be done. It's a perfectly valid argument, but if you take it to its logical extreme, if you see someone walking down the street and they've got lots of healthy organs, surely it would make sense to harvest all of those organs if they could be used to save the lives of 8 or 9 people awaiting transplant. Whip them off the street, murder them, dish out their organs. That saves the greater good. That is for the greater good. How is that different to this situation? Often people on the other side of it will say, if I don't take any action, I am not morally responsible for either death. The moment I pull the lever, I've made a choice that makes me responsible or more responsible. Whereas if I just do nothing, then I am absolved of guilt or blame, and then blame can be attributed to whoever tied them to the tracks, etc., etc., etc. There's no right answer, but it's an interesting one. What is the moral philosophy that guides you in these kind of situations? Now, the question is also re-asked in this way. You're walking along and you cross a railway bridge. There are 5 people tied to the track, and there is a fat guy leaning over the bridge. He's done nothing wrong. He's just looking over going, oh my gosh, what's going on? And due to your advanced knowledge in physics and biology, you know that if you push him off the bridge, he will get crushed by the train, but it will stop the train before those 5 people get killed. What would you do? It's an interesting one. Is it the same moral situation as the previous one, where you took an action, you killed one person to save 5 people? Now, lots of people don't feel that it is, and plenty do. But what is the difference? What's the principle guiding you as the individual walking across the bridge? Is it the saving of the most amount of lives? Because that is not really a principle that a Homeric hero would understand. Now, this is again this is a slightly more extreme reinterpretation of the same kind of thing. Again, don't worry, it's a silly little starter, but the idea is you and 4 other people have gone caving, and for some reason you've got a stick of dynamite with you. The person in front gets stuck in a hole. The cave is rapidly filling up with water as the tide is coming in. It's a tidal cave, obviously. Do you put the stick of dynamite next to the person and blow them up, so that you and the rest of you could escape. Now there's an extra twist to this one, because the person stuck in the hole that stops you getting out of the cave is pregnant. So do you sit there and die with the 5 people behind her, or do you put the dynamite next to her and her unborn child and blast her out of the cabin so you can all escape? Again, these are really just moral warm-up exercises to get you thinking about what are the principles that guide you in difficult decisions. So what moral principles govern our society? And again, we're just thinking about how our society works so that we can use it as a comparison with the society or societies that Homer describes. And remember from the last lesson on the Mycenaean or Homeric world, if you like, Homer's probably looking at a kind of hodgepodge of societies, maybe ranging from 1,500 BC, possibly down even to sort of 800 BC in the archaic, almost classical era. I think it's reasonable to view it as one relatively coherent society. But again, there is not historical debate, but academic debate, if you like. So what principles would you say govern our society? Again, this is hotly debated, but just to get you thinking about some ideas. So, and again, very easy to argue against these, but just to think about this. Equality. So often we aim for equality. If you earn a lot of money, you pay a lot more tax, and this gives rise to government revenue, which they use to give everybody education, everybody healthcare, etc., etc. Now, yes, don't get too deeply into the politics, but you could say that is a principle that exists, however imperfectly applied. And this idea of equality or surrendering things for the advantage of others, it seems so natural and normal to us, but is that something that has stretched across time? I don't think a Homeric hero would have understood the concept of paying tax so that someone they were not aware of or responsible for received an education or healthcare. The rule of law applies to all, but this is again a really important thing, and there are of course a few exceptions, but this is another fundamental revolution in the way society works. There is one law for everyone, so the richest man in the UK cannot murder someone, and neither can the poorest. The richest man in the UK cannot steal a loaf of bread, and neither can the poorest. Now, yes, again, there are all sorts of ways in which this is imperfectly applied, and it's riddled with complexity, but again, the principle's there, and that is quite a revolutionary idea, that there is one law for the whole of society, and this is something that a Homeric hero or heroic Homeric hero, Homeric hero works as an idea or a phrase that a Homeric hero would have understood. Just why should the lowliest peasant follow the law in the same way that the most powerful, glorious, strong king? It's ridiculous as far as they are concerned, one might argue. Although there is an exception to that. The government is democratically elected to serve the people. Very important point. Yes, it can be hotly debated. I can hear all you politics students and revolutionary political types gasping with shock and horror at this, but this is, probably one of the bedrocks of, Western society, modern society, democratic society, whatever you want to call it. The government is democratically elected to serve the people. Now, a Homeric hero would have found that a staggering concept, an idea of a democratic election, and the idea that the people in charge are there to look after others at their own expense and not further their own glory and family. So, what do I want you to keep an eye out for as this progresses? That works. Still works. Good. What morals motivate a Homeric hero? How are they different to our own? And how might this affect the way that we judge them? We'll look at those again at the end. So we are going to look at some very general Homeric principles and then look at some very specific concepts just to fill you in on this society of Homer's. So some principles of the Homeric hero of the Homeric society. So perhaps number one, or definitely number one on here, but perhaps number one in terms of importance is be the best that you can possibly be. Everyone is striving to be the handsomest, the fastest, the best fighter, the richest, to have the most beautiful wife. Everyone is seeking personal excellence in as many ways as they possibly can. And it is a complete societal obsession. It is something that is true to a degree for our society, but nothing like that of the Homeric hero. Number two, I'm in competition with everyone else. Now it's quite interesting when you look at characters in the Iliad and the Odyssey, they have some very close relationships. But do they have friends? It's quite an interesting one. In some ways, they're quite lonely individuals because they are, in almost all things, in competition with everyone else in terms of wealth, military glory, etc., etc., etc. So as we talked about before, it is a ruthlessly competitive society, and that almost invariably leads to tension. Number three, this is an important concept, and I think the word friends here, I don't know, doesn't quite translate into English because this is a quote taken directly from the Iliad. Glory to my friends, death to my enemies. There isn't this idea of peace and love to everyone. There isn't this idea of trying to not make enemies. In effect, you want enemies because then you can gain glory in fighting them. And you want your friends or allies or associates to gain reputation and power and status, just as your enemies are crushed. So it very much isn't this kind of equality, lovey-dovey Christian ideal of, well, not just Christian, really, humanist ideal perhaps of the world all finally coming together in love, peace, and harmony. That would happen in a Homeric context when all of your enemies had been crushed, killed, and subjugated. Number four, my reputation is more important than my life. So this is a debate that's explored in the Odyssey and the Iliad, but I think again it's a good general principle to start with, that heroes would much rather die than lose face or a significant amount of reputation. And if reputation is lost, then they will take extreme steps to take it back. But there are exceptions, and actually the Odyssey is quite a clever exploration of the nature of reputation in the Homeric world. Another important principal point, guests to my house must be treated with total respect. And there's a key value, Xenia, that we talked about before. And some scholars have said that Xenia is the fundamental moral principle to Homeric society. Good people have good Xenia, bad people have bad Xenia. That is how you know who is good and who is bad. Certainly amongst mortals. Immortals, as always, play by different rules. So another principle is really the nature of women. Wives must be faithful, and fidelity and chastity is fundamental to a woman in the Homeric world, and we'll explore that in a bit more depth later on. But a thing to think about just to start with is a man in the ancient world does not know if a child is his. There are no genetic testing. They sort of understand how sex and reproduction works, but not really the true biology behind it. So a woman always knows that a child is hers because she gives birth to it, but a man never quite knows. And so men go to extraordinary lengths to ensure the fidelity of their wives. In some Greek cultures, they've sort of fundamentally locked them away from any contact, well, almost any contact with the outside world. This is because if your wife gives birth to someone who is not your son, it is not your reputation, it's not your glory that's being continued. But we'll come on to that a bit later on. For a hero, though, on the other hand, lower status women, so slave women, for want of a better word, are fundamentally property, and so can be used without any real shame or dishonor to a hero for fun, for having casual sex with, whether they particularly consent or not. What's the matter, Mimi? Really? I'm afraid it's true. It's not fair, but it's true. Right. So, as we talked about before, the most fundamental and important concept in Homeric society, one could argue, and remember this is a scholarly subject, so there will be plenty of scholars who argue for all sorts of different things, but I think this is probably the best place to start. The most important value concept guiding moral purpose in the Odyssey and the Iliad is xenia, hospitality. Now, as we talked about before in the Mycenaean world PowerPoint, xenia is so important because it allows society to function. Without xenia, there is arguably no cohesive society. I think that's pretty true. There are definitely other motivations, but I think xenia is so important. It gives an individual honor, but it allows society to function. Now, xenia can be broken down into a series of steps and concepts and ideas, and some scholars will say there's really quite a formal structure to it all, almost like a kind of Japanese tea ceremony type thing, if you like. Others say, well, no, it's a little bit more fluid. It is much more really the kind of the expression of politeness to a guest and meeting their needs. But we'll look at it in a sort of more formal sense, if you like, the pattern that usually develops. So you have a guest and you have a host. Now, when the guest approaches seeking hospitality, and that's important, if you approach not seeking hospitality, then you haven't formed a xenia relationship, and the rules for guests and hosts do not apply. It has to be a relationship that you seek as a guest. The host can't really turn you down. You must come seeking guest status, if you like. And in a sense, that's obvious because, if an invading army turns up with a desire to kill everyone, they don't get guest status. They're not asking for it. So all of these moral rules and prohibitions from the gods don't apply. The rules and regulations apply when someone seeks guest status. So the guest approaches, and the host will then welcome them in, be respectful, give the supplicant, that's the person seeking aid, food, drink, and the facility to wash. It might be washing your hands, it may well be a full bath. It depends on what's available and what the guest wants. Once that's done, the host can then ask questions of the guest. Who are you? Where are you from? Etc., etc. And this in the ancient world is an extremely important way of getting information, especially if someone has come from far away. There are no newspapers, there's no writing in reality. Information is really quite scarce and rare and valuable. So questioning a guest on where they've been, what they've been doing, can be extremely useful for the host. It also allows the host to understand where he can then go and get the sort of reciprocal hospitality if he requires. Furthermore, it might allow a host to understand what level of xenia needs to be provided. If you're entertaining a prince, you need to give someone a princely level of xenia. If it's a beggar, it would be a very different kind of xenia, although in a sense all of the rules still apply. Once they've gone through this process, and a guest may well stay for days or weeks, and once they've gone through the process, the guest decides to depart. The host then gives the guest a present as well. Now that present could be something like help with your onward journey. It could be a lift. It could be a cup. It could be a sword. It could be a high status piece of treasure. And that is obviously to help the guest on the way with his journey. But there's also, again, an element of competition here. If you're known for giving away these most amazing Xenia gifts, your status rises with the quality of the gifts that you've given away. Now, on the other side of it, the guest must be courteous and not a burden to the host. This is the expectation on behalf of a guest. And as it's immediately obvious when you look at the suitors in Book 1 of the Odyssey, they are not being courteous, and they are being an extreme burden to Odysseus and his household. They are stealing his wealth and abusing his wife. So they are fundamentally breaking this part of the contract. You must not burden the host with your presence. Now, what is this idea of Xenia and guest friendship? So guest friendship, if you like, is a kind of development or part of Xenia, this overall idea of hospitality. And it is definitely more applicable to wealthy families because you're looking at this kind of exchange of information between families. This guest friendship, or Xenia, if you like, can be inherited and passed between friends. So as you see sort of at the beginning of the Odyssey, when Mentes is knocking on the door and basically saying, well, this relationship was established between me and Laertes, who's Telemachus's grandfather, and now he's seeking not actually very much, but to stop off and have a drink and a chat as part of that relationship. So these relationships tie families together for more or less forever. So it's creating these strong, complex social bonds and alliances. Now, another crucial thing to remember about Xenia is that it has religious significance. It is, in effect, a religious ceremony. Zeus has a manifestation called Zeus Xenios, where he appears as, he could appear as an old man or something along those lines, asking people for Xenia, for hospitality. And if you're rude to him and throw it out, you have fundamentally insulted the most powerful god ever to exist, and he absolutely ruins you, destroys you. He goes around testing people's Xenia. So in a world where people believe in that, if a beggar knocks at the door, he might be Zeus testing your hospitality. Because Xenia is a religious system, ceremony backed by the gods. And I think the practical reason for this is, as we talked about before, Xenia is crucial to the survival of Homeric society. And as a result, violation of Xenia is a very, very serious offence. And we see that in both the Iliad and the Odyssey. So the Iliad and the Trojan cat, thank you, Meme. The Iliad and the Trojan War is a story about the violation of Xenia. So Paris takes Helen's wife. Sorry, it's getting late. Paris takes Menelaus's wife, Helen, and the Greeks raise the entire country and pursue them across the seas to the city of Troy, which they destroy completely and utterly. So just because someone broke the rules of Xenia and took another man's wife, their society is wiped from the face of the map. Now, there's obviously other interpretations and ways of looking at it, but I think that's a very, very valid one. A breach of Xenia led to genocide. We also see it in the Odyssey. The suitors are breaching Xenia, and things do not end well for them. Spoiler alert. So, Xenia, absolutely crucial to characterization in the Odyssey, to morality in the Odyssey, to motivations and stories in the Odyssey, and of course the Iliad as well. And here's a nice picture of Xenia. So The second most important concept, again, some could argue the first, and actually, in a sense, it's a bit not childish, but it's a good idea to try and rank things. You know, first, second, and third. You know, who are my favourite students, for example? No, I'm just kidding. But I don't know. It isn't always the case that you simply have a first, second, and third. If you want to go down that route, I would argue kleos is the second most important concept. It doesn't translate perfectly, but it can be translated as glory or renown. And that is absolutely crucial to a hero, because it's the closest a hero can get to immortality, to have your deeds spoken of, sung of, understood, known. Because remember, there's no writing stuff down, apart from tax records. And so your reputation depends on your deeds being sung of and talked about. And that is how you survive. That's how you get immortality, which is something that all of these heroes are desperate for. Now, kleos can be inherited, and a son will gain kleos from his father and expand it. So who you are, your family lineage is extremely important in obtaining kleos as a son and transferring it as a father, which is one of the reasons why they're so obsessed with guaranteeing lineage, ensuring that women don't cheat and introduce someone else's son into the equation, if you like. Now, kleos is so important that Achilles, that famous hero, chose kleos over a long life. He was given an explicit choice. You can die young and have the most glory amongst mortals, or you can live a long life, happy life, peaceful life on a farm and die a very old man. And Achilles chose a short, glorious life because that was far more important to him than a long one. Now, how do you get kleos? Kleos in battle, fighting people who are equal or superior to you. There's obviously much less kleos in, you know, if you're a great hero in fighting some scruffy peasant with a small stick. That's not going to really get you kleos. You know, you have to fight equal or greater warriors to improve your reputation and renown and kleos. Other ways of obtaining kleos are hunting. You know, hunting in the ancient world is a real sign of manliness and a great way of winning glory. You're taking on something dangerous and controlling it. There's also that element of men civilizing nature, perhaps, to hunting as well, which is an important concept to the Greeks. The other way you can get kleos is speaking in assembly. Now remember, Telemachus is instructed to speak in assembly by Athene, and that's part of building him up as a hero. He's gone from being a completely whiny, whingy little brat to just starting to develop as a hero, showing good xenia to Mentes as Mentes appears, and then gaining kleos from speaking well in the assembly. Telemachus is still awful, but we'll come on to why later on. So the third most important or significant value, if you want to rank it, is one called time, or honour. It is very much different to kleos and glory. Time best translates as, you know, esteem, honour, or maybe fame. And it's the value attributed to a person by society. It tends to be a combination of honour and material wealth. So material wealth is absolutely crucial to a Homeric hero's identity and value. We tend to have this really big separation between material wealth and morality. Often it's a reversal, if you like. Isn't it, Meme? Meme agrees. In that, if you have lots of wealth, you are often considered to be immoral, probably because of how you got it or because you're not giving it away. Whereas in the Homeric world, it is considered to be moral to obtain wealth, and it gives you great esteem and honour. Now, time can be demonstrated through gifts, but also sacrifices. You don't tend to sacrifice to people very much, although it's not impossible. Odysseus does offer sacrifice in the name of Nausicaa, or rather promises he will, and probably did. But often the sacrifices are to the gods. So if you sacrifice 100 bulls to a god, that gives them great time, which they love. Now, if you remember back to the Iliad work that you did, Achilles, one of the reason why he stopped fighting for the Greeks and prayed to his mother to bring death and destruction upon them was because Agamemnon took his slave girl Briseis. And Achilles didn't love Briseis. He hated the loss of honour. Briseis was a material object, if you like, a thing that gave him status, and Agamemnon took it away. And that is what enraged Achilles enough to almost bring about the destruction of the Greeks at Troy. Thank you, Mimi. Yes, so Gold, Time, and Angelina Jolie as Time slave girl. Can't remember. Right, so another important value, something that drives heroes, is this idea of arete, excellence. And it can mean excellence of any kind. It really is about fulfilling your potential in who you are or worth. So for a Homeric hero, it'd be strength, courage, daring, success on the battlefield, obtaining wealth, perhaps, if you did it in an excellent way. And this is something that heroes are driven to do all of the time, complete their potential. For women, it is very much a driving factor, but it is obviously different. So wifely duties, so looking after the house, looking after the husband, looking after your son, and the fundamental duty of any woman in the ancient world is producing legitimate male heirs. So male heirs with your husband, and there being no question of you having cheated. Now, there's an opposite motivation to arete, if you like, which is that of eidos, or shame. And it translates as shame, or perhaps loss of face. I think by and large, heroes act out of a desire to obtain kleos or time, but some scholars do think that actually avoiding shame was an almost more important motivation. And if you think about it, Telemachus at the beginning, he's horrified by the shame that he suffers from Mentes receiving bad xenia. So it's definitely there, it's definitely a thing. Shame comes from not fulfilling your heroic duties, not meeting your potential. And a true hero would much rather face death than shame. Good. What else have we got? Oh yes, this is Hector and Achilles fighting outside the gates of Troy. So if you remember, Hector, even though he could have stayed behind the walls in safety, has to go out in front and confront Achilles. Achilles really being motivated by kleos, to conquer Troy, and Hector perhaps being motivated more by shame, having to go out to face Achilles, because Hector knows / suspects that he's going to lose. Now, another important characteristic of a hero, and that is techne, or skilled craftsmanship. And often means skilled craftsmanship with an element of cunning or intelligence. So the absolutely classic example of that is the Trojan horse. So that required great craftsmanship, but there is also that kind of intellectual dimension to it as well. It is normally about material objects, but it can be about speeches. So a well-crafted and effective speech in assembly can absolutely be a demonstration of a hero's techne. Yeah, wooden horse. There you go. Now, there is a list of questions, Homeric scruples or dilemmas, if you like, which I will attach to the lesson PowerPoint assignment, however it's transmitted. And the idea is, it's a bit of fun. The idea really is to look at these modern situations and think about what a Homeric hero would do and why, justifying our actions using the core principles that we have spoken of, well, I have spoken of at length earlier on. And it's, you know, it's hopefully a fun activity, but it is important that you start to get into the mindset of a Homeric hero, to be able to analyze Homer's great work. So what I'd like you to do, having gone through the Homeric scruples and had a play, had a go at understanding what a hero might do, is turn to book one. Can you find examples or references to the following in book one of the Odyssey? So Time, Kleos, and Xenia. So as many as you possibly can. So that could be, you know, a good side or two of A4. So in this situation, you know, such and such does this action, which highlights a hero's desire for Time or Eidos or Kleos or, oh, sorry, I'm not doing Eidos. You can do, go for it. So where do we see these things? What happens with regard to them? Second question, what value does Telemachus perform well? Not a tricky question, but what does this say about him as a hero, perhaps? And sorry, just remembered, in the workbook, you will see at the very beginning in the glossary bit, next to the gods, where you write in the information about the gods, you will see a lot of these terms there too. So I'd like you to fill out that section of the workbook where it says, you know, what is Kleos, what is Time, etc., etc. So it should be a nice grid there for you to fill out with all of these values. So make sure that gets done, so you've got a very clear record at the beginning of the book of who the gods are, what they do, what all of these terms are, what they mean, because they are driving principles to the Odyssey and the Iliad. And again, just to be crystal clear, the exam is on the Odyssey. That's the module that we've chosen. But you need to understand the Iliad to be able to understand the Odyssey, and you need to understand the Iliad to understand Virgil's Aeneid that we look at next year. Even though it's Roman epic, it's directly influenced by the Iliad and the Odyssey. Good. Hope all that's clear. Hope this all makes sense. And it's a real shame that that you don't do this one in class, because this is one of my favourite lessons, talking to people about morality. There's always someone in class who's got some very strange ways of looking at the world, but for whichever cohort this is, I guess you'll remain anonymous for a little bit longer. Cool. Okay, take care, and I will see you in class whenever I see you.